Every year, during National Police Memorial Week, we honor the memory and we mourn the loss of the deputies that have died in the line of duty. Although we cannot gather this year as we have in the past, we will always honor and never forget the sacrifice of these deputies, who will forever be defined by their dignity, loyalty, and courage. Let us remember their sacrifice. Deputy James McMahan, end of watch, January 16th, 1871. Deputy Charles H. Nichols, end of watch, January 20th, 1871. Deputy James McMahan and Deputy Charles Nichols were shot and killed while attempting to arrest a suspect. While the officers attempted to handcuff him, he produced a handgun and shot both officers. The suspect was one of two brothers, John Younger, also known as the Younger Gang, and they were the ones that shot and killed Deputy Edwin Daniels of the St. Clair County, Missouri Sheriff's Department on March 17, 1874. The brother who murdered Deputy Nichols and Deputy McMahan was also shot and killed in the shootout known as the Roscoe Gunfight. The Younger Gang was also connected to the death of Bureau of Indian Affairs police officer Frank West in 1886 by the husband of Belle Starr, an accomplice of the Younger Gang. Deputy McMahan had served with the agency for one day. He was survived by his wife and is buried in Pioneer Cemetery in Dallas, Texas. Deputy Nichols had served as a Confederate officer in the Civil War and is buried in Pioneer Cemetery, Dallas, Texas. Deputy George V. Vise, end of watch, June 5th, 1878. Deputy Vise drowned in a creek following a posse ride. At about 10 a.m. on Wednesday, June 5th, 1878, Deputy Vise was returning to Hutchins after searching for an escaped horse thief. While crossing Cottonwood Creek, his horse bucked him off and he was caught in some foliage and drowned. He was survived by his wife and two sons. Deputy Addison C. Pate, end of watch, September 9th, 1895. Joe Meeks had notified Sheriff Ben Cabell that two men had robbed his store and the men were walking towards Dallas. The sheriff and one deputy waited at the railroad crossing over the Trinity River, and Deputy Addison Pate and Mr. Meeks waited at the Trinity River wagon bridge. Mr. Meeks spotted the men, and Deputy Pate approached them on horseback. Both men opened fire with their pistols, and Deputy Pate returned fire. Deputy Pate was struck once in the chest and once in the hand. He died within minutes. The two men, identified as Loren Cady and Lou Moore, escaped. Loren Cady was shot and died from his wounds 2 months later when Deputy U.S. Marshals attempted to arrest him in the Indian Territory. Lou Moore was later arrested and sentenced to life in prison. The conviction was later overturned and he was remanded for a new trial. Deputy Pate was buried in an unmarked grave in the Oakland Cemetery in Dallas, Texas. Deputy Thomas I. Woods, end of watch, December 21st, 1922. Deputy Woods was shot and killed in a gunfight between deputies and three suspects running a whiskey still. One suspect later shot and killed Deputy Willis Champion during an attempted jailbreak. He was later executed for the murders. Deputy Woods had been with the Dallas Sheriff's Office for 10 years. Deputy Willis Glover Champion, end of watch, September 26, 1923. Deputy Champion was shot and killed as two prisoners, one of them a convicted cop killer, attempted to escape from the jail. Deputy Champion was shot in the abdomen and knee. He later succumbed to his injuries. One of the suspects was killed in the shootout and the other was later executed. The suspect who was executed had shot and killed Deputy Thomas Woods the previous year. Deputy James C. Wright, end of watch, September 28, 1924. Deputy Sheriffs James C. Wright, Lonnie Marshall, and Edward Thompson were traveling by automobile to serve a search warrant for an illegal whiskey still in the Trinity River bottoms. Deputy Marshall was driving, and Deputy Wright was in the front passenger seat when their squad car was struck by another vehicle. Wright was thrown from the vehicle and suffered severe head injuries. Deputy Marshall received several cuts on his head and arms. Deputy Thompson was uninjured. Deputy Wright died from his injuries on September 28, 1924. Deputy Wright was survived by his wife, Betty, his father, and 3 sisters. He was buried in the Mesquite Cemetery. Deputy Thomas L. Noel. End of watch, May 31st, 1928. About 1 a.m., Deputy Tom Noel was dispatched to a disturbance at Bachman Dam. Deputy Noel never arrived at the disturbance. His body was found about 3:30 a.m. by a service station operator. Deputy Noel was slumped over the steering wheel of his vehicle. An inquest determined that he had died of a stroke. At the time of his death, Deputy Noel was serving as the bailiff in a state district court. He was survived by his wife, Emma D., and 1 son. He is buried in the Frankfort Cemetery in Collin County. Deputy James Willis Fuller. End of watch, June 13, 1932. Deputy James Fuller succumbed to a shotgun blast suffered 2 days earlier while investigating a burglary on a farm where guns, whiskey, and tires had been stolen. The deputies were inside the location when the suspects returned looking for more items to steal. The suspects began firing into the house and struck Deputy Fuller in the head. The deputies returned fire and took the 4 suspects into custody. 1 suspect was convicted of murder and sentenced to 99 years. His sentence was later reduced to 10 years and he was released April 27, 1939. Deputy Fuller had been with the sheriff's office for 5 months and had previously been with the Dallas Police Department for 13 years. He was survived by his wife and 2 sons, and he is buried at Grove Hill Cemetery in Dallas, Texas.